Please be seated. So in each of our lives, there is usually some degree of change going on. And particularly in the summer months, which can be so full, and in the winter when things get still, oftentimes it can feel like a sense of stasis falls in. And then things start to pick up over the spring and in the summer, especially this part of the year, where things are, I can be outside. And we'll go to the park, and we have festivals and parades and all this other stuff going on. And oftentimes we can lose track of some of the more granular parts of our existence. It can become easy to not pay attention to the things that might be more challenging. Yesterday, during our 150th worship service, we sang "Enter, Rejoice, and Come In." And there's that one line in "Enter, Rejoice, and Come In" that says, "Don't be afraid of some change." It's so easy to sing. Don't be afraid. It's change. It's fine. But of course, it is way easier said than done. Because when things change, it can often feel like a betrayal. It can feel like we were so used to how things were happening. It was so comfortable. We were appreciating it so much. Even if we didn't like it, it can still have a sense of comfortability and familiarity to it. And that can be jarring when the change happens. So certainly death is a change that we need to struggle with and learn how to metabolize. But birth, too, is a huge change that involves bringing some new things on board and letting some other things fall away. Losing a job is a big transition. Getting a job is also a huge transition, a huge change. So in any scenario, whether it's 1% grief and 99% gratitude, or 1% gratitude and 99% grief, there's probably at least a little bit of each of those mixed together. But they don't cancel each other out. The heart is not a zero-sum game. It's not some grand equation that needs to even out in the end, or we're adding and subtracting things. Each part, each strand is valid on its own. And what our grief, when we have that strand, when we're just holding that strand, what it makes possible is a certain empathy and connection that can be all too hard to trace down otherwise. One of the most valuable aspects of death is how it tends to bring together loved ones, to create richer bonds between them. My grandfather and I, my dad's father, had never really had much of a relationship with each other. I would certainly see him at family gatherings, but he was just sort of this person who was off talking to other people in the corner, and we barely ever shared more than 30 seconds of conversation between the two of us. But after my dad died, and we had reason to connect with one another, to talk about his memory, to talk about what he meant to each of us, a relationship was born, where we got to know each other as people in a way that we never had. And that was the gift in my dad's death. Those changes can be beautiful opportunities that we shouldn't pass up. As a society, we are not practiced in talking about grief. We all too often hide it, save it for when we're by ourselves. In those moments when our resolve cracks, or maybe we're in a group of folks and we just can't hold it back and our grief peaks out, all too often we feel shame or regret around expressing it. In the words of musician Nick Cave, there is a great deficit in the language around grief. It's not something we are practiced at as a society, because it is too hard to talk about, and more importantly, too hard to listen to. So many grieving people just remain silent, trapped in their own secret thoughts, trapped in their own minds, with their only form of company being the dead themselves. But we can show up for each other, and we can allow others to show up for us by sharing our griefs bravely. The author Cole Arthur Riley has this to say about lament. I should tell you I've been sad for as long as I can remember, long enough that some days I wonder if I even know sadness at all. Have you ever said the same word over and over again until it's unrecognizable coming from your own mouth? You can become so familiar with something that your familiarity renders it foreign. I don't know if I'm the person to write this letter to you. A few months ago, I was going through old journals from childhood. I was looking for the first short story I ever wrote and instead found poems by Childhood Cole describing how she doesn't want to exist anymore. The first entry of this kind was from 1998. I was 8 years old. I have no memory of writing any of them, Cole Arthur Riley writes, or even of being aware of death in this way. Now 32, I sit at my kitchen table with pages face down. I begin starting and erasing messages to a friend, attempting to translate the pages to them. I take pictures of the pages, I delete them, I start a solemn text, I start a witty text. With every draft, the cost of sharing grows larger. Is this what trauma dumping is? Will they feel like they need to find something wise to say? Does it seem like I just want attention? Does it even matter at all if it was so long ago? In the end, I send 2 lines from a poem accompanied by a joke. This is from 11-year-old Cole. I hate that every day I wear this veil and watch detached and yet overwhelmed with emotion, and I want nothing more than to scream. I hate that I'm sitting here feeling alone and repulsive and have an itching to walk out on life altogether for this reason. Send. But with a joke about being a prodigy at cursive and how the hell I know the word repulsive as an 11-year-old, the phone rings, and I regret it all. I normally wouldn't answer, but it feels so cruel not to. And I don't want him to think I'm feeling exactly what I'm feeling. I brace myself for whatever pity or awkward words of comfort he has assembled. But when I pick up, there's just silence. I don't know how to explain the difference between a silence that is judgmental or awkward and one that is tender. When you live it, you know. We listen to each other breathing, a compassionate silence stretching out in the space between us. To the silence, I say, I know. And I don't know what I know. A few more moments pass, and he says, if you're going to keep reading, set me down next to you. He says, you don't have to read them out loud. I'll just be here. What does it mean to be present to the pain of another? How do we keep ourselves from rushing to trite platitudes and promises that we have no right to utter? We must become honest about the fact that usually, when we are attempting to resolve someone else's pain, it is not for their comfort, it is for our own. What happens when you remind a friend you aren't afraid of their pain? How will you behold their suffering without reducing them to it? 2 friends miles apart, sitting at the kitchen table, listening to each other's breath, and there is no resolve, only the tender silence of everything we don't have words for. Maybe you were taught that sadness is more dangerous than liberating, but healing comes when we are at last able to point to where it hurts. Lament is not a threat to our survival, but a means to it. It is how hope's salve knows where to go. Still, it would be irresponsible of me to guide you into lament without a caution. There is a difference between lament and despair. The distinction is vital. You are so much more than your pain. And the world, for all its terror, is awake with tremendous beauty. We cannot allow sorrow to become any more real to us than the glory of the night sky, the laughter around our kitchen tables. Lament should be an invitation, not an unwelcome guest. I tell you this because there are forms for sadness that survive in the mouth of despair, a kind of sadness that does not want you well, because it cares more for its own survival than for yours. Do not let your grief become a locked door. You must carefully and slowly allow others to enter. Social media, for better or worse, has granted us entrance into the pain of the world in ways we might otherwise be obtuse to. But most days we can scroll from great tragedy to great tragedy without feeling or processing it in any meaningful way. Our grief has been expedited as we are thrust into and ripped from expressions of sorrow with the flick of our thumb. If we are to endure the weight of each access, we must learn truer habits of emotional attunement. Otherwise, our efforts of solidarity with the suffering will become an interior quicksand. When you practice lament with intentionality, you claim agency over your own emotionality. It's not a sinking, it's a steadying. You light the candle on the altar for the one you lost. You linger in your parked car, letting the song move you. You cry and don't apologize for it. You tell your stories. You name exactly what has been stolen. This is my apology to you. You are no burden. You shouldn't have had to rush through your grief. You should never have had to sit through thoughtless pep talks or trite and over-spiritualized words about hoping and hoping. You deserve more than that. I wish you had no reason to grieve, but now that it's arrived at your door, I pray that you open to it. I hope its stay looks how you need it to. You are no further from the divine because of your pain. With every wail, you become more human. Every ache and admission that something mattered. Until you're ready, don't let them wipe away a single tear. The words of Cole Arthur Riley. There is so much grief. We lose loved ones. There's injustice everywhere. The planet struggles to hold us. And this grief is here with us, whether we acknowledge it or not. Francis Weller, in his book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, writes of 5 gates of grief, 5 ways we encounter the grief that moves us individually and brings us into community with everyone who grieves in a communal hall of grief. Each individual grief is a passageway into this larger experience of communal grief. So let us journey through these gates, these passages together, to be together in our grief. On the way back from this communal hall of grief, we will turn towards gratitude, the gratitude that is intertwined with those griefs. And just as our grief and gratitude become a part of us, we'll mark our experience of grief and gratitude by eating bread together. And the bread we eat will become part of the strength we take from this day. And so we have slices of bread up here, which folks will pass around. We have some gluten-free bread for folks who need gluten-free bread. We also have water as an alternative to the bread. If you want to take one of each, then you're welcome to do that. If you would prefer to just have one or the other, that works too. Does anybody need any gluten-free bread? Nobody needs any gluten-free bread. Wow. We are all glutinous folks. Okay. So as they pass it out, Jeremy will play some music. So don't eat any of the bread yet. We're going to be using it after it's all been passed out. 10 times in the service when you'll be invited to take a bite, which means 10 bites or 10 sips of water, or one of each if you prefer. And then I'll ring this chime, and as you hear the chime, then eat or drink or both. There is a silence that is more than waiting to speak. Together, let us build a holy silence where our hearts can listen to their own beating. Breathe in. Breathe out. Feel your weight in the pew. Trust it to hold you. Pour your silence into a larger silence. The first gate of grief, the one we acknowledge most often, is the loss of someone or something we love. Those who have loved us, those who have inspired us, those who have comforted us. The love continues on even though we no longer know how to reach the beloved. This grief becomes so clear in the seats left empty in holiday gatherings, those we wish we could have one more conversation or meal or adventure with, those we wish we could have one more experience with those whose presence has meant so much. There will never be another like them. We love them and we have lost them. For all that we have lost, we mourn. To mark your grief for those you have loved and lost, are invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. The second gate of grief is the places within us that have not known love. For every time we could not be truly who we are, had to cover up a part of ourselves, we feel grief. For the times we've been rejected, for the times we could not be known, and for the times we were unloved because of who we are. We mourn for the LGBTQ+ youth kicked out of their homes or harmed by those who claim to love them. We mourn for those who found abuse where they should have found love. We mourn for those who are afraid to be themselves or to love whom they love. We mourn for those who died of hate or cruelty, or for those who fear persecution and abandonment, and for the places within us that have not known the love that we need. To mark your grief for the places within you that have not known love, to dedicate yourself to offering that love to others, you are invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. The third gate of grief is the sorrow of the world. What is my personal grief when faced with pandemic or fire or famine or war or genocide? It is still grief. There are many passages into this hall of grief, and we can meet each other at the common altar. The sorrows of the world connect with us to each other and bring us together to mourn. We mourn wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes, and the sorrows of our beloved earth. We mourn the systems of violence in our culture. We mourn white supremacy. We mourn poverty and hunger and war. This, too, is grief with us in every moment. To mark your grief for the sorrows of the world, you're invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. The fourth gate of grief is what we expected and did not receive. Not so much a thing we had and lost, but a disappointment. a depth of community we don't know how to find, an emptiness or hollowness we don't know how to fill, a relationship that did not last, a child we wished for but did not have, a chance that didn't come, for the times when belonging did not come or was not enough, for the times when community was not deep enough to fill our need, we mourn. To mark your grief for all you expected and did not receive, are invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. The fifth gate is ancestral grief, the losses of those who came before us. Each of us has ancestors who lost their homeland. Some when they chose to move to this continent, some when they fled their homes or as refugees, some when they were abducted and enslaved, some when they were forced from their land by violence. Each of us has ancestors who lived this story, or we lived it ourselves. Each of these stories bears its own trauma and loss. We acknowledge that for many of us, our ancestors not only suffered, but caused others to suffer. We therefore carry not only their own grief, but also grief for the harm that they did. We mourn for the trauma our ancestors experienced and for the trauma our ancestors caused. We mourn the ways this trauma passed down into the present day, in the continued oppression of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We mourn for what all of us have lost in a culture that values the idea of whiteness over what any of us actually are. For the many ancestral griefs coming from us, from our ancestors of blood and our ancestors of spirit, we mourn. To mark the ancestral grief that lives inside you, you are invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. So those were the 5 gates of grief. Breathe in, breathe out. I won't ask you to eat any more grief today. Let us return to the holy silence that we found before. Breathe in, breathe out. Let your heart listen to its own beating. Feel your weight in your chair. Feel the earth holding you tight with gravity. In this silence, you are known and loved beyond all words. One of the benefits of grief is that when we feel it fully, it also expands our heart to experience more joy. Nick Cave, when writing about the death of his son Arthur, wrote, "Since my son Arthur died, I have been able to step beyond the full force of the grief and experience a kind of joy that is entirely new to me. It was as if the experience of grief enlarged my heart in some way. I've experienced periods of happiness more than I have ever felt before, even though it was the most devastating thing that ever happened to me. This is Arthur's gift to me, one of the many. It is his munificence that's made me a different person. My wife, Susie, too, we've never felt more engaged in things. I say all this with a huge caution and a million caveats, but I also say it because there are those who think there is no way back from the catastrophic event, that they will never laugh again. But there is, and they will." For each of Weller's gates of grief, there is a corresponding gate of gratitude that leads us back into the great hall of meaning and worth, back to our common altar. There is no need to mourn the things that do not matter. We mourn things, people, and events of worth and meaning. And for the chance to hold this meaning, to say, yes, this matters. There is goodness as well as sadness. We may find ourselves grateful. Gratitude may also help us hold our grief, connect us to goodness when there is so much to mourn. So for the love we share with others, we give thanks. There is so much to love in this life. For the freedom to love as we will. For beloved family and friends, and for all those who touch our lives and inspire us, we give thanks. So to mark your gratitude for those you love, you're invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. For the love we have received, the love that has nurtured us to this very moment, we give thanks. Love has carried us through so many moments to be here and now. For compassion, nurture, and companionship, for the love that has met us along the way, for the love that has journeyed with us, we give thanks. To mark your gratitude for the love that you have received, you're invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. For the goodness in the world, for that which is beautiful, for that which inspires wonder and joy, we give thanks. The goodness of the world comes to us in nature, in the earth's cycles of seasons, rest and growth and rest, in the delight of experience and in our fellow human beings. For the goodness that we have met in ourselves and in our many experiences of this life, we give thanks. To mark your gratitude for the goodness of the world, you are invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. For the community we have found, for all the places that we are known and loved and can be ourselves, for the times when we know we have enough and the times when we know we are enough, for the sense of belonging to a place, to a community of love, we give thanks. To mark your gratitude for community, you are invited to take a bite of bread or a sip of water. For the joy of our ancestors, our very presence in this moment is the triumph of our ancestors. That their blood and spirit has carried forward in you and through you to this day is their joy, just as you will find joy in those who by blood or spirit descend from you. For this joy we give thanks. To mark your ancestors' joy alive in you, you are invited to take a bite of bread. Thank you for going on this journey of grief and gratitude together. We'll be having a gathering after the worship service to discuss anything that came up for you right in the sanctuary.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Tom. That was wonderful. We choose to welcome the Spirit of life and share our resources to actively nudge our world toward a heaven on earth. This month, we are sharing our Loose Change for Social Change offering with Aaron's Farm. Located in Hobart, just east of Robinson Lake Park, Aaron's Farm is a nonprofit horse and farmed animal sanctuary for abandoned and abused animals. Their mission is to provide an amazing home for their rescued animals, as well as a unique opportunity for the public to get the needed exposure and education about animals in the food and farm industry. To this end, they offer school programs, farm camps, and a variety of classes for children and adults. Being a nonprofit, Aaron's Farm is always needing supplies and donations to continue this great work. FIA will use your August 2024 loose change for social change contributions in the tin cups to generate a check payable to Aaron's Farm. Because they rescue a wide variety of animals, Aaron's Farm also seeks gift certificates to Tractor Supply, Home Depot, and Menards. If you'd like to go beyond your loose change contribution and buy a gift card for Aaron's Farm yourself, please place it in an envelope marked Aaron's Farm. You might not have that with you today, but next week. And FIA will deliver it to them with our check from the church. Aaron's Farm's list of needed supplies include the following: dog food, dog toys, leashes, cat food, cat toys, fly spray, horse grooming supplies, paper towels, toilet paper, hand soap. I'm sure we have this list someplace else besides me telling you right now. Dish soap, cleaning scrub brushes. If you wish to donate any of these items, please put them in the rolling wood box in the parish hall, located just to your right before you enter the sanctuary during August. I'm getting there. The money in the baskets goes to sustain the mission of our congregation. The money in the cups goes to Aaron's Farm. For those not with us in person today, there is an online link for both one-time and regular donations. And here you are. I have another way that we invite the Spirit of life is by joining together for fun and fellowship. And I have a fun and fellowship announcement. The second annual Farrell Family Bocce Ball Church Fundraiser Tournament is going to be Saturday, September 7th. Yay, I can come. With a rain date of Sunday, September 8th. You can sign up to just eat dinner and play bocce ball. You can sign up as a team of 2 or just yourself, and we will find you a teammate. It is $25 for dinner and $25 to play bocce. Winning team splits the bocce ball money. And do not feel like you have to give that money back to the church. Oh, I thought that's what you were supposed to do. If you can roll a ball, you can play bocce ball. Last year was super fun, so don't miss out this year. Sign-up sheets are in the parish hall today. Ask Tracy or Michelle. Michelle's here if you have any questions. Now, please rise in body or spirit and join me in singing, "What Wonderful